In this video, I'm going to be taking a look at Diaclone's robot base, or Great Robot Base, as he's more commonly known, from Takara. I feel super honored to have this guy in my collection, and this video is really a way to share him with other collectors and enthusiasts that maybe haven't seen one in person, or just anyone that has an interest in Japanese die-cast robot toys. When I was looking around and researching it, there wasn't much in the way of videos on YouTube, and in general, information was pretty fragmented. So I'm hoping that this will help others experience and enjoy what really is an incredible toy and honestly a piece of art in its own right. Also should mention that this example, while it's in very good condition, is not at all mint. The chest plate has lost a lot of the chrome and it doesn't really pop like it should, and his leg plates here have seen better days. So Robot Base really is the origins of the Diaclone line, which many of you probably know is where the majority of the DNA for the Transformers comes from. I won't go into too much here, but essentially when transforming robot toys were blowing up in the early 80s in Japan, executives from Hasbro took notice, and at the first opportunity went around to all the major toy companies in Japan, buying up licenses for their toys outside of Japan. They then took those to Marvel to write them a backstory and give the characters names, and thus the Transformers were born. Pretty much all the G1 Autobots came from the Diaclone line, especially the so-called Carbots. Hasbro nixed the Japanese toy names, threw them in Transformers box, and sold them in the millions. At that point, there was really no reason for Takara to continue the Diaclone line, so instead they picked up the Japanese license for Transformers, and the rest is history. Okay, so that's the quick backstory on the relationship between Diaclone and Transformers. But there are also quite a few Diaclone toys that Hasbro passed on, and those were mostly the 80 to 82 Diaclone toys, as these focused much more heavily on the Dianaut interaction and were more space-oriented than the later Carbots, Dinobots, Insecticons, and Constructicons. Those non-Transformers are what interests me most about the Diaclone line and where my collecting interests lie, so I hope to share a few others with you in later videos. So getting back to this guy, Robot Base was the very first Diaclone toy. Released in mid-1980, he and the Diaclone line were an evolution of Takara's popular Micro Man, or Micro Man, toy line, which similarly featured humans piloting robots and vehicles. Some of the late Microman toys from the Micro Changi line ended up in Hasbro's G1 list also. Megatron, Soundwave and his tapes, Bumblebee and Cliffjumper, amongst others. But as the 80s kicked off, it seemed Microman wasn't quite micro enough though, with figures about 9 to 10 centimeters in size, so Takara went to a third of their size for Diaclone. The concept for the Diaclone line and the early toys were the brainchild of a design company by the name of Studio Nue, which included designer and artist Shoji Kawamori. Kawamori-san went on from Diaclone to design Macross, which is known in the West as Robotech, which, to bring everything full circle, included the toy that was licensed as Transformers G1 Jetfire. So it's 1980 in Japan, and this ad comes on TV.
地球エネルギー資源を狙うワルダー星人ダイアクロン隊員出動大地を揺るがす巨大ロボット基地ロボットベース君の燃える指令をキャッチして今ロボットベースが戦う操縦するのは君だダイアクロンロボットベースダイアクロン
I don't know if it's possible to set the scene for kids of today. I don't think my kids would get it with the plethora of toys and toy franchises and stuff that are around now. And keep in mind this is pre-NES, so video games weren't really a thing yet. But sure enough, this would have set kids' brains on fire with excitement. I'd love to see what a toy store shelf display would have looked like with boxes and boxes of this guy on display, kind of like Buzz Lightyear in Toy Story 2. Robot Base is really indicative of Japanese robot design. While the majority of the Diaclone line is generally always smaller than you expect, this guy really has an impressive size and scale. His head and face sculpt is iconic, and not just because it literally was and still is the Diaclone logo. Like almost all great Japanese robots, his design is heavily informed by feudal Japanese armor. For me, that's the secret source of the beauty in these guys, and the really timeless robot designs, Diaclone, Gundam, Chogoku, they all have that Japanese DNA that draws on such a unique history. He really is incredible to look at. A big part of the appreciation of vintage toys is the packaging. You really get a sense of the era of the toy, and it teleports you to the in-store or Christmas or birthday unwrapping experience that kids would have had. Being the first toy in the line, Robot Base was an all-new design language for Takara, showcasing the red and black color scheme that is used even still today with the modern reboot of the Diaclone line, but with splashes of yellow and bright pink that really pop. There's no images of the toy on the front of the box. It's all windowed through to the actual toy, as well as almost every accessory. And you can see written next to each window in very small writing is a description of what each accessory is or does. Front and center is the face and chest, which allows you to see through into the play area within his chest cavity. One downside though is that the packaging windows damage easily, and that makes the cardboard most susceptible to damage. As you can see, mine is taped together in some of the thinner areas where it's obviously torn, and most other examples I've seen are in similar or even worse condition, unfortunately. As we turn to the back, we get a gorgeous full-length photo of the toy in a diorama setting, with his pilots all set up. One in the hand station, a few up top, and even some inside his chest, presumably controlling him. There's some nice flares happening on the chrome, and the lights of the power station diorama add life to the scene. Then at the bottom we have a cartoon detail of the Dianaut soldiers, showing an artist's impression of what they might look like if they had more detail. And to their right, the toy is photographed in its base form, showing off its alt mode. So you can see both showcased here on the back. Moving on to the sides, we have basically the same imagery here on one side, but this time blocked out on vibrant blue and greens. And a nice little detail is that the main photos step out of the border, and the top image even has the rocket arm bleeding off the edge of the box. Flipping to the other side, we get the most information on what's actually inside and the various play mechanics. There's also some English to help set the scene for us non-Japanese. So you can see the instruction room, the base escalator, the removal catapult, and the weaponry hanger. I'll obviously go into more depth and show you what each of these does in a minute, but it's nice to see it all broken down on the box so kids could clearly see how cool this guy was and really imagine what it'd be like to play with him. And then probably go and bug the hell out of their parents to go and get them one. While we're talking about the packaging, if you're looking at collecting one of these guys, you quickly notice that there's an Italian version around that's essentially the same, but it was released by GIG in Italy under license from Takara. Same goes for many of the vintage Diaclone products. Now my understanding is that they were made in Macau rather than Japan, as the Takara models were. And of course the packaging will be in Italian obviously, but otherwise they're identical. Now I can't speak for other collectors, but personally I'm very focused on the Japanese released versions, simply as they are the way that the toys were designed and originally released. They do command a premium though, which kind of indicates that I'm not the only one that feels that way. But the bottom line is you can probably get a very good or excellent Italian Il Grande for the price of an average Japanese robot base. Like many toys of the era, everything inside of the box is in styrofoam. And with the box removed, we can start to see all the details and included accessories. The Dianauts came mounted on a blue card with a blister front that was stapled in such a way that it would be pretty difficult to remove the figures and keep it undamaged. As you can see, we've got the two fists that come separated from the body, the rocket or laser cannon, two hip rockets, two small ships with red detail at the back, one larger ship with an orange windshield, the escalator device, and of course the 5 Dianauts. Although it may look like a lot of die cast, they're mostly plastic. The red and grey ships have a good weight to them from the wheel underneath, which is metal, and the rockets are able to be used as missiles, so adding too much weight would mean they probably wouldn't travel as far and potentially could be dangerous. Looking at the Dianauts, the toy includes a really nice set of 5 figures: blue, black, yellow, green and red. The Diaclone Dianauts are reasonably well articulated for their size, under 3 centimeters tall, and they have tiny magnets embedded in their feet to help them stick to any of Robot Base's die-cast areas, including up on his shoulders. Their bodies are plastic, but they feature die-cast metal hands that give them a touch of weight. These particular figures are known as Type 1 Dianauts, with the Type 2 being released a year or so later. For me, the Type 2 are not as cool. The head sculpt kind of has this weird headphone apparatus thing that kind of sits out like a weird 70s Willy Wonka kind of hairstyle, or maybe Princess Leia. And once I've seen them that way, it's kind of hard to get that image out of my head. So I definitely prefer the slimline Type 1 that come with Robot Base here. So we've spoken about the accessories, and I'll get back to them as they relate to the play mechanics later. But now I want to focus on Robot Base himself here. Looking at him here in robot mode, he really is very impressive, with a lot of detailing and a really nice color palette with the striking blue, red and yellow. He has a very static 70s, 80s kind of neutral pose, which for me is really part of the charm. While he fits into the die-cast category, in reality he's largely plastic, so he tips the scales to just 900 grams or just shy of 2 pounds. It feels like there's die-cast core in there, but I'm not game enough to take him apart just to confirm that. At his size, if he was made of die-cast, he would be almost impractically heavy. Standing in robot mode, he's 45 centimeters tall, or 1 foot 6 inches, which is the tallest of anything the Diaclone line has produced, even including the modern reboot line. If you're used to collecting other lines, such as Masterpiece Transformers, he's about the same size as Studio Cell's Unicron, and a little shorter than Toy World Constructor. I mentioned at the start of the video the two areas where mine could be improved is the chest chrome, so this outer window that opens into the bridge of the base, and his leg plate runways. And from what I've seen, those are the two areas where you see the most wear and tear, other than the rubber tank treads on his feet and the accessories. In theory, both the chest and leg pieces are pretty easy to replace, but my chances of finding those as parts are pretty much zero. If there's one with those parts in good nick, then it's likely that the rest of him will be in as good, if not better condition than my example here. Collection DX has a nice video showing you how to switch out the runway leg plates if that's something you want to do. Taking a close look at his head and face, you can really see the details that, going back to my earlier comment, really showcase the Japanese heritage and give a warrior's presence. You can also see that whoever applied the decals to this one was probably a bit too excited. While I'm speaking about the head, I'll quickly mention that Takara released additional masks for Robot Base. There's 6 in total, and they're pretty novelty in appearance, including one that's literally a cartoon tiger face. To be honest, I don't really know the origins of these, if the masks are licensed characters, how they were available, if they're a mail-away promotion, but they're incredibly obscure and hard to find. I've seen only a few come up for sale, and they run a minimum of about $1,000 US each. To be honest, I don't see the collectability value unless you have the cash to burn and are fanatical. In terms of assembly, for robot mode, it's really just a case of inserting his fists, and note they're in a cross pattern so it can be inserted in either orientation. The rocket attachment is interchangeable in the same fashion. Then the hip rockets just slot into these clips. To be honest, I was pretty nervous doing it, but I recommend you get the bottom tabs in first and then roll the top clips in. Taking them out is the difficult part as they click in pretty well and you have to stress the clips to remove them. I recommend using a spudger just to pry them gently enough to get the top out and then remove them. His arms can slide up and down in the shoulders or be completely removed, potentially for play as separate ships. To adjust or remove the arms, just slide the friction lever up to release tension and push it back down when you want to retighten. In terms of articulation, there's little surprise that he's quite rigid. His legs don't really go anywhere. His waist can spin 360, which gives you a bit of posability, but as I said earlier, I'm a fan of his very neutral pose anyway, so I don't really rotate it unless he's in base mode. His shoulders can spin the whole way around, and his elbows have a nice forward ratchet up to 90 degrees to allow him to hold a bend. So that brings us to one of the most fun mechanics of Robot Base, which is the rocket punch. Both forearms are spring-loaded, so you can shoot from either arm just by pressing in on the red button. For a 40-year-old toy, the springs have a lot of life, which is my experience across the entire vintage Diaclone toys, as well as Poppy. The Japanese didn't mess around when it came to projectiles for children's toys. The fists shoot in either orientation, so in theory you can fire your Dianaut Pilot, but I'm a bit too precious about mine to do that. And of course you can fire the laser gun attachment also. So that's kind of it for robot mode. The transformation is pretty easy and just involves splitting the legs apart and lowering him down. You can see some double hinges there that allow his feet to remain horizontal, and the blue stands that are concealed within his leg. He can sometimes take a little adjusting to sit straight, but he's fairly sturdy once set up. Now we're in base mode, that's when everything starts to happen. Using the red button to the right of his head, we can open up his chest to reveal 2 floors of play area. Upstairs we have the control room, or the instruction room as it's labelled on the box, with a really detailed control panel decal on the back wall that features a big radar display and lots of cool decals and moulded details on the walls, floor and even the roof. The 2 control seats for what are presumably the drivers or maybe the captains of the base can be spun around using the front dial so that they're either looking out of the big window of his chest or watching the displays at the back. Downstairs we have what I'll call a missile room, and there's 2 main activities going on here. First one, as you might imagine based on the name I've given it, is that you can click the hip rockets into place to be fired out of the chest. The spring is actually contained inside the rockets rather than the clip, so you just push them onto the black piece and the little red clip at the top will catch it in place until you're ready to fire. Then when the bad guys are in range, just push down on the red lever at the front to shoot the rocket. The fist can be inserted horizontally, allowing a figure to be stationed out there, perhaps ready to be rocket punched off into the distance. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, but they do look good sitting there. The next base play mechanic, and possibly Robot Base's ultimate party trick in terms of vintage appeal, is the Escalator entryway. This is super clunky, but something that really brings back memories of early 80s toys for me, so I really love it. To install the escalator, you first need to raise the door on his back, which can be a bit stubborn, but should raise all the way up. You then slide the escalator in from the back, and it's fairly fiddly, but there's slots for it to slide into. It should slide all the way forwards until you feel it click into place, and from there you can just adjust the stairpiece to where you feel like it looks right. Every 10 centimeters or so on the rubber escalator tread, there's a magnet piece for you to place your incoming Diaclone troop, and then just rotate the red wheel to transport him into the missile room and get him ready for duty. You can see it's a little wobbly on mine. It doesn't feel like there's additional slack that's been introduced due to their age, so maybe they were always like this. But it is pretty easy for the Dianauts to fall off, unfortunately. So I'm just supporting him with my left hand on the stairs, as you can see, to keep him straight. The escalator can remain in place when he's in robot mode. You can just close his back door, fold up the stair part, and it'll kind of just sit there. But in my opinion, it kind of detracts from his appearance. And if I'm not using the escalator piece, I'd rather it was stored away safely, as the rubber is quite fragile, as you can imagine. And with the size, tread, and the magnet pieces, it's not really something that could easily be replaced. The next play mechanic is what the box calls the removal catapult, but I'm just going to call it the headship. Our guy's helmet pulls forwards, and I think the idea is that the antennae are becoming guns or lasers, and then the larger ship with the orange windshield can be placed into the void above his head. So he can be stationed up there to fire the helmet cannons or take off and land as needed. As a bonus, other Dianaut figures can stand up there on the deckled shoulder sections, as they are also magnetized. As we come down to the legs, you'll notice that the upper thigh grey sections fold out and become stairs down to the leg plates. And these plates are metal also, so that the Dianauts can be easily positioned out and about on the runways. And that then brings us to the weaponry hanger as it's listed on the packaging. And the idea here is we can store both of the red and grey smaller ships or sleds inside what were his feet. And then they open out to the hangar doors to allow the pilots to fly in and out. And of course there's yet again another spring-loaded projectile mechanic here. So you just place the ship in the cavity with the back against the red back plate, and then carefully slide the whole section back until it locks with a click. To shoot them, just press down on the red button or post that's sticking up at the back. It's worth noting that the ships can be permanently stored in there, even in robot mode, but to do so the spring will be loaded, and there'll be pressure on the firing clip, so I don't recommend it for long periods of time. So that's the vintage Diaclone Great Robot Base from Takara. Really hope you enjoyed watching this video. Like I said, I feel super fortunate and grateful having this guy in my collection, and almost feel obligated to share its greatness with others. It's really one of the most important robot toys in history, at least in my opinion. So if you enjoyed it, please let me know with either a like or a comment. This is the very first video for this channel, but hopefully first of many. I'm super excited to share some other toys from my collection, both vintage and modern day, in future videos. So if you're interested in that, please subscribe. I'll leave you now just with some prototype sketches, as well as ads and artist depictions of Robot Base from the early 80s to enjoy. Most of these are taken from the Takara SF Land Documents book, as well as Figure King magazine.